Welcome to the Organizational Maneuverability Radio Show, Defying Gravity so your team can soar at altitude, with host Marshall Goldsmith, Executive Coach Randy Swaim. For team success, because I think anybody that's probably listening to this video, today, can be aware of when people that they worked with did this, or sometimes maybe they did this, kind of thing. Where, you know what, there's a lot of people that just go back to their rote, factoids back here that maybe they kind of picked up, 5 years ago. But in doing that, when you look at the true awareness of strategic clarity and thinking, you got to realize that very often one of the factors or a couple of the factors that are involved in this situation are a little bit different than that. And if all you have is somebody that's just going back to what their comfort level is, because maybe something that they kind of thought about or came up with 5 years ago or whatever, they're missing the boat. And one of the things when you're talking about leading your team, if you're letting people do that, or if you are kind of aware that you are doing that sometime, what you're doing is you're completely throwing aside your real strategic awareness, your real plans for good success. And it's just something that people have to be aware of, because if that's what a lot of people do. And and almost anybody that's probably listening to this video can be aware of when this has happened sometimes. And you know what, in some cases, when they did it. But you know what, if somebody has questions about a situation that they can't answer, one of the things that the most people do is they go back to their past. They go back to what they thought in a previous situation. Well, guess what? This situation may not exactly be the same factors involved. There may be a couple of other factors that they didn't expect. And if all you're doing is going to your, radical picture of what you think it should be, you may be missing the boat. And I will tell you, you would be surprised at how many people I have heard in my journey of life, how many people I have heard that when they do something and it doesn't really work out so much, all they do is they point fingers and they blame the situation. Well, you know what? The fact is, you were not aware of a couple of the factors involved. What did you need to do differently? And so this is when you talk about leadership and when you talk about real strategic vision and strategic awareness and strategic success. That doesn't happen if all you're just going is going back to your your the back of your brain, in neuroscience, where you have all the comfort factor back here and everything. If that's all you're doing, you're not getting the job done. And the other part of it is you're not developing your team, because you know what? If there's a point where you kind of brought up an awareness of a certain aspect, or if somebody on your team was aware of an unexpected factor, even when you were not, and if you can lead the team in such a way where it moves in a slightly different situation, to be able to achieve, and it has results that nobody expected, and it's like, whoa, whoa. And you know what? You're sitting there and all your team members are going, wow, look at that. Holy cow, and all that. Guess what? That can sometimes happen. And but you have to be aware of if, to the extent to which all you're doing is going back to what you're used to in the past back here, or your comfort zone of rote little comfort thing of this is what that is. Well, you know what? May not always be. may be a little different in ways that you didn't even aware of it. And so it's just a key aspect that you were sort of asking about this. And again, there's a lot of neuroscience to it, because if all you're doing is going back here, you're not engaging the processing that helps your brain truly become aware of the factors involved and what is truly happening in this situation. And so it's just a key part of that. What one of the factors is, they got to get their mental processing going, where it's not just back here, and to ascertain absolute clarity on the true situation. But the other thing that a leader can do on that, and this is a good concept of leadership and team development, to what extent are you asking your team members valuable questions? If all you're doing is asking rote academic questions that go to, uh, 10-year-old academic answer, you're not getting the job done. But if you ask a key question which helps somebody think about something on this situation that you didn't think about, and they bring it out, and you go, oh, interesting, interesting. Let's kind of explore that for a second, kind of thing, and that kind of thing. And those are all aspects about this. So there's some aspects that you've got to have clarity on. To what extent are you just going with through rote academic stuff, or to what extent are you truly achieving strategic success and all of that? And you'd be surprised at how many managers I've seen along the way that are low level managers, because they're just doing short teams of maybe 5 or 10 people or whatever, but they just go to those rote academic things, and there's a sense for, and when I say this, people that are watching the video will probably go, yep, I've seen that before, kind of thing. There's an aspect about that where all they do is they just try to focus in the people on a square or whatever, and they just uh, questions that they ask are just rote things that go to simplistic things that may not be true in this specific situation. And so those are just aspects about it that true leaders, that's one of the things that makes somebody a true leader, as opposed to just a control freak manager. Can actually bring their team to radical success. That, if your CEO comes over to you and goes, wow, what'd you guys do? That was awesome. Wow, I didn't expect that. What what'd you guys do? That's great. And you know what? You're not going to hate them doing that, kind of thing. So it's just an aspect about it that is key with this aspect of it. But that's also why it's one aspect where you have to avoid this one thing where all you're doing is going back and shutting your processing off and shutting your strategic awareness off, and just going back to rote comfort level things back here or stuff, which may not be applicable for this situation. But the answer to your question, well, it depends. Because guess what? What is your mental processing when you do go back and look at that? If all you're doing is going back because you're trying to get that right answer and just leave it there and just not even think about it anymore, if that's all you're doing, you're missing the boat and you're not being a leader. But if you go back, and some of the questions in your mind, or some of the questions that are in your team's minds, is, so how is this situation just a touch different than that one? Then let me see, how would I be aware that that's actually going to work here? Because if you shut your brain off and you make that assumption, you may be wrong. And you know what? Being aware of the other factors that are a little bit different, you might say, you know what? For that solution, we got to tweak that a little bit. We got to adapt it and change it a little bit. Let's do that, team, and find out how we're going to do that and get clarity on that. And so, like I said, it's as much as I hate to say it, the answer to your question is it depends. Because you know what? If all you're doing is shutting your brain off and going back to rote academic things and saying, well, here's what we got to do, kind of thing. And you would be surprised at how many people in today's world that I have heard express exactly that. And that's amazing. If that's what you're doing, you're missing the boat. But if you go back and you process it correctly, where you can get a sense of how this situation's factors are slightly different. And you know what? We need to tweak that. We need to kind of adapt that a little bit and tweak it to get real success here. And you can bring it up, and your team comes to synergy on, exactly, what you're looking to do, and how this little tweak on it, this little adaptation to that strategy is going to get us there. And you know what? It may. And so the bottom line is, like I said, the short answer to your question is it depends. It depends on what you're doing with it. If you're just going back there to be comfort level and just, okay, and that's all you're doing, you're missing the boat. But if you go back and you're looking at it with your processing engaged, where you're able to truly examine the reality of the situation and also be aware of on this situation how you may need that may be kind of a short structure at ground level or whatever, but you know what, as we go to this one, what will we need to do a little bit different? How might we need to adapt that to gain real success? And those are some of the questions, those are some of the mental processing that a leader has to be able to do. If all you're doing is shutting your brain off and going back, you're missing the boat. And I'll tell you what, feedback simply goes back to something that had already happened, and it's almost like, okay, well, I know what happened back there, and I don't need to do nothing else. That just happened, and this is why I did, and all that. If all you're doing is feeding back, notice your strategy is not about what you're trying to accomplish moving forward. True strategic thinking is about that. And so you got to realize that if all you are doing, and if all your team is doing, because of the way you're bringing them along, if all your team is doing and all you're doing is feeding back, you're completely missing the boat. And you're not generating mental ability, and you're not generating awareness, and your strategic thinking is not clear because you're making assumptions that are not necessarily true with this situation. And but so if you think about it, sometimes, when you think about something that happened 5 or 10 years ago, and I will tell you, there've been a few times in my life where I remembered some things like that, but I don't just apply it going forward, because feeding forward is a little bit different. And guess what? That might need to be different. But when you go back and look at that for a second, you can come up with some awareness on how things are a little bit different, and all of that. And when you're talking about feeding forward, and when you're leading your team, your organization, when you're trying to be the good leader in it, guess what? Leading forward and feeding forward is what's needed. And but one of the things I will say, if all you're doing is, again, just shutting your brain off and just going back to something that happened 10 years ago or something like that, you're missing the boat. You are not being a leader. You are not being successful. You're not really doing it right. You're just going into rote academic things. But if feeding forward, you realize how those situations may have changed. And you know what? In going forward, maybe in this situation, if you're going forward and you are aware. And if you think about it, you can have a little bit of a clarity where you say, okay, that's a start, but you know what? This is just a little bit different. You know what? Here's what we need to apply differently on this going forward. And so that's the key aspect of feeding back or feeding forward. You got to realize that when you're moving forward with your team, guess what? Today is today. Duh, right? The feeding back is back there stuff that's already happened and you know the outcome. But guess what? Life is not going back, it's going forward. And you know what? You better be able to feed forward correctly and have some clarity in some cases how the strategic things that need to happen are different on this situation because of these factors. And so that's a key aspect of it that a lot of people today do not fully understand because they tend to go to just rote academics. And you'd be surprised at how many, like I say, fairly low level, sort of lower level managers um, I have seen that do just that. And it's just, you know what? They don't get it done. And there's some people that just try to threaten their people to say, just shut up and do this, or whatever, kind of thing. Guess what? If that's your only mindset on it because of feeding back, you're not doing it professionally, you're not doing it ethically, and you're not doing it right, and you're not doing it successfully. But feeding forward, if you have clarity on the real situation of this environment right now and what's happening, and you can get clarity on that, and you can get clarity on some of the factors that you didn't expect. And because of that, you can make the right processed solution and strategy to accomplish it. That can be great things. And so it's just it's not just rote pure academic. It's feeding forward and basically having clarity on the reality of the situation and the factors and you know what you need to do. And so that's a key aspect between the two of those that people have to be aware of. As a captain in the cockpit, kind of thing, one of the things that you got to do is you got to have clarity on the right questions to ask your team. And just to give you an example of some of those questions that are the right questions, if you get somebody that's thinking about what they did 5 years ago or something like that, one of the questions that you can say is, well, let me ask you this. What is different and unexpected about this situation? And when you're talking to your team as a leader, and this is something that true leaders do, and you can't have a conversation with your team, is when you ask questions like, really? Well, I'll tell you what is the one unexpected factor that you think is going to come on scene? What is the one unexpected factor that you are going to watch for as you go do this? And a lot of times those questions make people go like this, and they make people go, whoa, wow, kind of thing and everything. And the bottom line on that is that you have to get their processing going so that if an unexpected factor starts to sneak on, they can be aware of it that quick and already have a little bit of a mindset on what they're going to do different to minimize the impact of it. And those are so with the situation, when you're talking about being a true leader, if all you're doing is being a manager and you're just dictating to people and telling them what to do, you're missing the boat. But as a leader, if ask your team some of those questions, what do you think? Because tell me what you see on this. and they kind of come up with the factors and what they got to do and all that kind of stuff. And then the next question that I might ask is, well, I'll tell you what, if you take off and something happens that makes your whole brain go, whoa, I didn't expect that kind of thing, kind of thing. I say, what's that one factor that might make that happen for you? What's the one factor? And I get them to come up with something, and then I might say, well, I'll tell you what, if that comes up, what do you need to do? How are you going to minimize its negative impact on what you're trying to accomplish? And obviously, if it's not pilot related, but if it's just your organization, the same concept can apply. If you're talking to your team and you say, well, when this situation happens, what's the one unexpected factor that you think might come on that would make you go, whoa, kind of thing, and have them come up with maybe one or two factors. And then, well, I'll tell you what, if that factor comes up, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to respond? How are you going to be successful in it? And get them sort of thinking about that ahead of time a little bit. And so that's a key aspect of it when you're talking about that sort of aspect and in strategic thinking on this. But this is a key aspect that differentiates true leadership from just dictatorial management. If you are a true leader, you're making these kind of things become real available in your team to reach radical success that nobody else ever expected. And that's when you're talking about people that are on your team, make sure that if you're the leader, that you can do that. And a key aspect of what you said is make sure you got some forward visibility on that instead of just going back. And feeding forward is key on it, and being and having some awareness of some of those things of what would be unexpected and all that. So all that can be so critical in it. Welcome to the Organizational Maneuverability Radio Show, Defying Gravity so your team can soar at altitude, with host Marshall Goldsmith, Executive Coach Randy Swaim.